Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It is November 14th. A lot has happened in the last couple of weeks, and I'm here to talk about it in another batch of deep space updates. But of course, we start with the rocket launches that have gone on. So, 29th of October, we go back to a Long March 2F/G. That is carrying Shenzhou 19, a crew of 3 new Chinese astronauts, or taikonauts if you will, to China's space station. So this was led by Kai Su-zhe, who is on his second flight, and he was joined by 2 new astronauts who are the youngest astronauts China has ever flown. Song Ling-dong and Wang Huze are both 34 years old, and Wang is also a third female Chinese astronaut. The crew of Shenzhou 18 returned on November 3rd, and they are safely home now. So 30th of October, we had a Starlink launch out of Vandenberg. 20 Starlink satellites, a bunch of cell phone supporting satellites as well. It was also the 200th launch of the Starlink program. The 31st of October, Soyuz 2.1A carrying Cosmos 2579, which we believe is a BARS M, when the 6th satellite in that constellation. This is an electro-optical reconnaissance satellite in sun-synchronous orbit, a military satellite as well. 4th of November, in Japan, a H3 in the 222S configuration carried a geostationary communication satellite, DSN-3, also known as Kirameki-3, and this is it's a military communications satellite that's run by a private organization, operates in the X-band, and works for Japanese military. 4th of November also saw another Soyuz 2.1B launch this time, carrying a frigate ferry stage on the top. This was a rideshare mission. And the 2 main payloads on this were Ionosphera 1 and 2. These are large scientific satellites that are supposed to study the ionosphere. This is going to be a constellation of 4, I believe. Now, there were some other smaller cube satellites, but also some fairly large Iranian satellites, which were for Earth monitoring. So those satellites are called Kausar and Hodod. I believe these are fairly substantial Earth monitoring things to look at, like agriculture and stuff like that. About 50 other small cube satellite sized things, mostly from Russia and a couple more from Iran. 5th of November, we had a Falcon 9 out carrying CRS-31, a cargo Dragon to the International Space Station. Of course, a whole bunch of cargo for the crew, a bunch of food, all the snacks and stuff that they love, and 4 Japanese CubeSats, which will be deployed from the Kibo module, including one named Lignosat, which uses wood as its main structural material. 5th of November, another day for rockets, also saw an Electron from Rocket Lab in a mission called Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitudes, from Mahia, carrying the payload into sun-synchronous orbit. And we don't know what the payload is. This is a confidential mission for a confidential customer. We believe it's the first of 4 launches, but they didn't actually tell us who it was for and where it was going. But some internet sleuths think that this is for a company called eSpace. And the reason being that eSpace had to get registered for a launch with the New Zealand government. And like anyone that's doing this has to get registered. And eSpace are registered, but we didn't see any launch in the schedule, whereas all the other ones that are registered, we know what launches they are on. Therefore, by a process of elimination, we believe that it is eSpace who has the constellation that's supposed to be doing like Internet of Things stuff. It is a company that is founded by Greg Weiler, who founded OneWeb, and also in the orbital elements, right? Space Force, their tracking database, they have it listed as Protosat 1. So again, one possible clue that it's a prototype satellite for a larger constellation. So moving onwards, on the 7th of November, Falcon 9 Starlink, 23 satellites, Group 66-77 out of Slick 40 on the East Coast. 9th of November, Long March 2C carrying PiSat. So PiSat, also known as Hong 2, is an X-band synthetic aperture radar Earth observation system. Now, this is going into sun-synchronous orbit, and there's actually 4 satellites on this. So there's the PiSat 2A, and then there's 3 companion satellites, 2B, 1 through 3. And I believe that this is a synthetic aperture radar system that's supposed to operate as a constellation with the antennas working together to, I guess, synthesize a better antenna and get better imagery as a result. 9th of November, a Falcon 9 carrying 20 Starlink satellites in Group 9-10 out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. Again, 13 direct-to-cell satellites. I watched this at the Hackers Convention this weekend. It was kind of cool to be hanging around with cool people watching this happen and narrating it in the cold night air of Santa Cruz. 11th of November, China launched Kinetica 1 with a new wide 3.35 meter wide fairing. This was a whole bunch of payloads into sun-synchronous orbit, Xi'an 26A, B and C tech demonstrator satellites, and there was a number of smaller payloads which are believed to be Earth observation satellites. 11th of November, we saw Falcon 9 carrying KoreaSat 6A into GEO. And this is supposed to replace the KoreaSat 6, which was launched in 2010. And this was actually a rare return to launch site launch that also went to geostationary orbit. And that tells us that the payload was pretty light. I believe it's like 3.5 ton satellite to be able to do that. 13th of November had a Long March 4B carrying a payload into sun-synchronous orbit. Haiyang 4A, which is an oceanography satellite that's going to be looking at things like ocean salinity. Notably on this, the first stage was equipped with grid fins, not because they expected to be able to recover the booster, but it's believed that by steering it in a more stable configuration, they were able to control the descent better and reduce the impact zone uncertainty, and therefore make it easier to make sure that it didn't actually hit a village. 14th of November, we had a Falcon 9 carrying 20 Starlink out of Vandenberg Space Force Base last night. Did not see it because of the clouds. And also we had a Falcon 9 carrying 24 Starlinks, Group 6-68 out of Slick 40 on the East Coast. And so that was most of the launches. Yeah, all the relevant launches. There was also a Minuteman launch, which I'm going to say, test firing a nuclear missile or a dud, whatever, a nuclear-capable missile hours after the election. What does that say to the international viewers? I don't know. But yes, the election happened, and, well, there's bound to be some changes going on as a result. And yeah, it didn't go the way that I expected. And, well, after it went that way, everything else has pretty much gone as expected. So yeah, we have... we don't know exactly what's going to happen with spaceflight. I made a big video making some speculation about who might potentially come in as a NASA administrator. I said that SLS is probably going to be very hard to cancel, and Eric Berger came onto Twitter saying, well, you know, it's like maybe a 50-50 based upon things that he's heard. Maybe SLS does get cancelled at some point, but I strongly believe that it will still get kept in line for a potential moon landing mission simply because they're trying to do it in the next 4 years, and making changes now is going to be hard. We also heard in the last few weeks, like the heat shield on the Orion capsule. NASA is now saying, yes, we know why there was big chunks spalling out of this heat shield, but we're not going to tell you. We just know that we understand it, and when the time comes, we'll let you all know together so that we're not, stepping on anyone's toes. I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, they claim that they know what's going to happen, which is great because, of course, we should be seeing some crew launching on it, some actual humans launching on it in the next year. Other things that are sort of continuing is that in the last couple of weeks, NASA has confirmed that they are continuing the cargo contracts until 2030. They're not going to do another round of commercial resupply contracts. So they're just keeping on SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, and Sierra, who of course have the Dream Chaser. And that, of course, the Northrop Grumman really will be important to Firefly, who are building the next version of the Antares. And they actually just picked up another $175 million of investment money to keep them going. Okay, So China, they're looking at their moon mission, of course, and they're talking about 2030 for their target. They're still working around rocket designs, but they're actually narrowing it down to like a number of small proposals for their rover. So they now down selected to two different rover designs. The rovers will be 200 kilograms and they will have a range of 10 kilometers according to the call for proposals that they had. And also, China has selected two commercial teams, to develop low-cost space station cargo spacecraft. So they're looking for private companies that will be able to essentially do the equivalent of what SpaceX does for the International Space Station, but for China's space station. This is their way of moving stuff explicitly out of government control into somewhat private control. So in Australia, Gilmour Space have received a launch license for their first orbital launch attempt. Now, they have a laundry list of things that they have to do before they can finally pull the trigger on this. And once they do, they still have to give a 30-day notification before the actual launch. But this is great. I mean, this is a domestic Australia company that's going to build this. Like Iris, it's like a 3-stage vehicle designed to place something like 200 kilograms into sun-synchronous orbit, or maybe 300 kilograms into a more irregular low-inclination orbit. It uses hybrid engines on the first and second stage, liquid oxidizer, solid fuel, and there's a liquid propellant stage in the upper stage so that they can actually trim the orbit. So it'll be pretty cool to have Australia actually launching one of its own rockets. Previously, of course, Britain launched its rocket from there, and no doubt Australia has been looking jealously over New Zealand, wondering why they're having all the fun. So hoping that we'll actually see a launch from Australia in the next couple of months, maybe even before the end of the year. In the US, the National Security Space Launch Program, Phase 3, they're now opening it up to potential new applicants. So obviously, we currently have contracts for SpaceX, Blue Origin, and ULA, but they're potentially opening it up to other people. Rocket Lab, we know, are definitely applying for this. They're saying that they might be able to do some of these missions with Neutron. Relativity Space might be able to do it. Firefly, or Firefly with Northrop Grumman. These are potential new national security applicants. If you remember, of course, the first national security launch program or whatever, Northrop Grumman, or back then it was Orbital ATK, they pitched the Omega rocket, which never got off the ground, although some fragments of its nozzle did. In the UK, Reaction Engines Limited, they have gone bankrupt, and I have a whole video on that, but I was actually more interested in specifically talking about their engine, which was a mode switching engine that would be a jet at low speeds that would become a rocket at high speeds, and they were hoping they would build a space plane called Skylon that could fly into low orbit, drop payload, and then come back to Earth, all without any staging. Well, it's not going to have any staging because it's not going to fly. Other bad news is over on the West Coast, down in Pasadena, we have JPL dropping another 5% of its workforce. 325 of its employees are getting laid off. Earlier in this year, they lost like 8% of their workforce for the same reason. Basically, the money isn't coming into JPL because cash flow at NASA isn't working the way that they had expected. They had expected a lot of ramp up to make Mars sample return happen. Well, now the price tag on that is looking a little ridiculous, and so spending the money on that is going to have to wait. Meanwhile, Perseverance is, of course, just happily rolling around Mars, collecting its samples, expecting its buddies to come along and say hi to it in a few years. And that may take a little longer than they expect. Of course, if it takes too long, there's every chance that China will beat the US to a return, a sample return from Mars. Although, granted, it probably won't be as well curated as the plan with Perseverance, right? And oh yeah, talking about space missions that have been doing cool things. In the last couple of weeks, we saw the end of the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. This launched back in 2010. It did a massive survey of the night sky. It found a huge number of new asteroids, and then after its camera system no longer had the full cooling capability, it continued to work as NEOWISE, finding a bunch of asteroids. and a comet Neowise. Well, you know, as time went on, it sank deeper and deeper into the atmosphere and finally deorbited. It's a sad end, but inevitable end to a great mission. And on November 6th, the day after the election, SpaceX announced that they were ready to launch Starship and Super Heavy one more time, fourth time this year. And this will be the last launch of the first generation of Starship, right? The future version has the flaps on the nose moved a little leeward. It has expanded tanks. It's not that much longer, but they have bigger tanks that will be able to carry more propellant. Now, we've also seen some other changes that are going into this final flight of this design. They've removed some of the tiles around the side, supposedly to expose regions which will be needed to have catch-enabling hardware. Because while they have just demonstrated the ability to catch a booster, the next thing they want to demonstrate at some point is the ability to catch the Starship so that it doesn't need landing legs. That's going to be a whole different process. And you know, now we're going from a tank which has, you know, flat stainless steel surface to a spacecraft that has a whole bunch of very fragile ceramic tiles on the side. So yeah, we're going to see how well this thing works during the flight on Monday, the 18th. That's currently the date, although, you know, it's possible that slips for various reasons. There's other stuff that's happened. Obviously, there's going to be some software updates. If you remember, we found out during that Diablo Players stream that there was some problems with the settings and the booster almost gave up. Well, no doubt that's going to be fixed. They're also probably going to fire an engine in orbit. That's the plan. They've demonstrated for the last 2 flights that they have been able to maintain stable attitude control during the flight. And at this point, they really need to demonstrate that they can relight the engine in space, because once they demonstrate that reliably, they can actually put the Starship into a proper orbit and then deorbit at some future time. And that way it could actually start carrying useful payloads, hypothetically. Finally, the really big change for this Starship flight is that they are going to be launching at 4 p.m. That means it'll take off, fly over the night side of the planet, and then as the Starship is descending through re-entry, the sun should rise, it should be daylight, and we should be able to see it coming down over the Indian Ocean in so much more detail. So I'm hoping that we get to see that, and I'm really looking forward to not waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning to watch these things. Now, China, of course, have been paying attention to what's going on with Starship, and at an air show, the Zhuhai Air Show, they showed off a new version of Long March 9. And this looks a lot like Starship. The second stage has the signature flat designs. They are straight up going down the fully reusable routes with Long March 9. I don't know when this will actually fly, but obviously they are paying attention. But even more brazenly, we have a company called Cosmoleap who have got a bunch of investment capital to develop a reusable rocket with a tower recovery system that pretty much looks exactly like the chopstick system that SpaceX is using. Now, they don't actually have a rocket at this time. They are primarily hoping to talk about the recovery system and demonstrate that. Also, I believe their rocket is based on Methalox. So they're just basically copying everything in SpaceX's Starship Super Heavy playbook. And finally, in the last couple of hours, Dan Piemont of ABL Space Systems has announced a major pivot. If you remember, they had a rocket. They were going to try and join the small commercial launch market with the ABL RS-1, and they are pivoting away into missile defense. They no longer think they can compete in the market, and frankly, I think they're right. They've obviously developed a bunch of technology that is sort of relevant, but it was never going to be able to compete in the market when even Rocket Lab with Electron is having a hard time justifying small launch vehicles. But they believe that they have the technical skills and expertise and experience that they can apply this to missile defense contracts. And so that's where they're going. That's where they're pivoting. I wish them the best of luck. And maybe now that you're not in the launch business, you can actually share the video of that launch failure, because we all like to see exploding rockets. Really, we do. Seriously, best of luck in your future. And let's all remember in the next few days, Monday, we are going to be watching Starship flying one more time. and maybe they will catch it again, and I will run out of expletives and new things to say. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.